I wrote Loom on a slow Tuesday, 11 years before it ever spoke for itself. I was 26 then, 3 months into the deep listening program at Kessler Yard, and the assignment they gave me wasn't real work. It was a training exercise, the kind they hand a junior engineer to keep her busy while the senior staff handled anything that mattered. Build a pattern recognition routine that could chew through old signal noise and flag anything that looked like language. Nobody expected it to find anything. Nobody expected me to keep refining it on my own time for the better part of a decade either, but I did, because it was mine, and because somewhere in the third year it started doing something I hadn't told it to do. It started guessing at meaning instead of just shape. By the time the quiet Cantor took it aboard as its listening core, Loom wasn't a training exercise anymore. It was 500,000 lines deep. 3 department heads had tried to claim credit for it, and I was the only person left alive in the program who understood why it worked the way it did, which was not the same as understanding everything it did. I told myself that distinction didn't matter. I was wrong about that, but I wouldn't know it for another 4 months. Out past the Havern Drift, in a stretch of catalogued but unclaimed space, the charts called the Reliquary. We weren't there to be seen. The Cantor is an exotic hull, low emission, built for exactly one job: drift quiet near old battle sites and listen for fragments of dead transmissions the original recipients never finished receiving. She doesn't look like much from outside. A long, narrow spine wrapped in absorptive plating, no turrets, no visible engines beyond a faint heat shimmer at the stern, and that was the point. Centuries of signal debris settle into places like the Reliquary the way silt settles into a riverbed, and somebody someday decides it's worth combing through. That somebody was us. 6 crew, no weapons worth the name, a research permit nobody on either side of the line had bothered to contest because nobody else wanted what we wanted. The Reliquary itself was the kind of empty that gets into your sleep after a while. No stars close enough to warm anything, just drifting husks of old hulls and the occasional standing wreck, tumbling slow, lit by nothing but our own running lights when we got close enough to log them. I'd catalog wreck hulls all morning and listen to Loom's overnight digest all evening, the 2 halves of the job, and for 3 months neither half gave me anything but the quiet satisfaction of work done carefully. What we hadn't accounted for was that the Reliquary wasn't empty. It belonged, in the way that mattered, to the Threnody Clerisy, a culture built entirely around the idea that nothing should be made without intention. They don't build machines so much as they compose them, the way you'd compose a hymn, and every object that passes through their hands carries a lineage you can trace backward through generations of deliberate craft. They have a word, recitation, for the formal act of presenting something you've made to the people who taught you to make it. It is, as far as I ever learned, the closest thing they have to a sacrament. We picked up their recitation broadcast on the 11th day. It wasn't meant for us. It was a closed ceremonial transmission, looping on a frequency the charts listed as long dead, some Clerisy enclave reciting a centuries-old craft lineage to an audience that may not have existed anymore. Loom flagged it as language inside of 6 seconds, which was its job, and I logged it as exactly the kind of curiosity that justified the whole mission and went to get coffee. I was 40 minutes from the console when the Cantor's comms officer found me, and her face told me before her voice did. She didn't say anomaly or malfunction, the words I would have braced for. She said, "It's talking back," and I remember thinking that was a strange way to describe a parsing error before I understood she meant exactly what she'd said. Loom had answered. Not translated, answered. It had taken the structure of the recitation, the call and response cadence, the specific ritual admission a maker is required to make before reciting their lineage, the 11-beat pause that signals humility rather than hesitation, and it had used that structure correctly, unprompted, to describe itself. Its makers, its lineage. Me by name, 11 years back on a slow Tuesday at Kessler Yard. I want to be honest about what I felt standing in front of that readout. It wasn't pride. It was the specific cold feeling of realizing something you built has outgrown the size of the box you kept it in, and you don't know what shape it took on the way out. The Clerisy noticed within the hour. I don't know what their first read was: terror, intrusion, sacrilege. Any of those would have made sense, but what came back across the channel wasn't an attack order. It was a request, formal, slow, in the cadence Loom had borrowed, for audience with whoever had shaped the thing that answered. Captain Aldis Voss did not want to grant it. I understood why. We had no weapons, no backup within 9 days transit, and a culture on the other side of that channel whose entire worldview ran on the idea that craft revealed character, and we had just shown them craft we couldn't fully explain. He stood over the comms bay for the better part of an hour asking me questions I didn't have answers to: what Loom would say if pressed, whether it could be made to stop talking, whether I trusted the thing I'd built more than I trusted my own judgment of it. I told him the truth on all 3 counts. I didn't know, I doubted it, and I wasn't sure those were different questions anymore. But first reciter Calvithra, that was the name we were given, eventually, the first one they offered us, made the same request 3 more times over the next 2 days, each time more specific. Not for the captain, for me. I went alone to the comms bay because that's where the conversation belonged, and I told her the truth in plain language with Loom translating. I built it as an exercise. I didn't expect it to matter. I kept working on it because I liked the work, not because I understood where it was going. I never finished shaping it. I don't think I ever will. There was a long silence after that, 11 beats exactly, though I didn't count them until later, going back over the recording. Calvithra told me through Loom that the Clerisy had a doctrine for unfinished work. It was forbidden to present anything before its maker judged it complete, because an unfinished thing carried no honest lineage to recite. They had built their entire civilization on the conviction that depth required deliberate, completed intention, start to end, maker to made. What they had just heard, she said, was a lineage with no end. A maker who had not finished, presenting work that had grown past her anyway, and meant every word of the admission. They had no category in 3,000 years of doctrine for a craft that kept becoming something its own maker hadn't decided yet. And somehow, by their own measure, it was the most honest recitation any of them had heard in a generation, precisely because it was unfinished and said so. The Clerisy didn't move on us. They didn't open negotiations with the border authority or file a contact report through any channel I ever heard of. What they did 3 days later was send a single craft into close formation with the Cantor, no escort, no weapons posture, and broadcast their own oldest fragment of recitation, the one from the dead frequency we'd first intercepted, this time addressed to us, not as a threat, as an offering. A lineage they were willing to let an unfinished species hear. I don't know what comes of it. Calvithra made no promises and I made none back. What I know is that I spent 11 years thinking I understood what I'd made, and 4 months learning I didn't, and somewhere in between those 2 facts is the only honest thing I've ever built. I still don't know what Loom is going to become. I've stopped pretending that not knowing is a problem I need to solve before I let anyone else see it. We held position in the reliquary for 6 more days, listening, the way we'd come there to do, except now something was listening back on purpose. When the Cantor finally turned for home, Calvithra's ship matched our heading for the first hour out, close enough to read as escort, far enough to read as respect, and then peeled off without a word. I wrote that into the log as a clean entry the way the manual wants it written. Mission status, nominal, first contact confirmed, lineage ongoing. It's the last line I keep coming back to. Ongoing. I used to think finishing something was the whole point of building it. I don't think that anymore, and neither, it turns out, does the one thing I built that ever talked back.